Somebody here is asking, I was just wondering if you know of any resources for those who have just gone through spiritual abuse and are recovering. Left a very cultish church earlier this year, and my husband and I are making baby steps. Soon I plan on getting my hair cut. That may not seem like a big deal, but I haven't been allowed to cut it in 10 years, so it's a big step of healing for me. My friend who also left and I are taking these strides together. If you know anything, I would greatly appreciate it. I have done more work with abuse survivors than with cult survivors, but from what I've gathered, the experiences seem to be very similar. What distinguishes a religion from a cult is abusive tactics, and it helps if it's a false religion also. And it does not have to be a religious organization to be a cult. If the organization has abused you, tried to control how you think, and taken advantage of you, then it may qualify as a cult as well. I feel like the first thing I should say is congratulations on your escape. Maybe that's calloused, because I feel like I should also say I'm really sorry that happened to you. Being mistreated and taken advantage of wounds you on a level that hurts for years and years afterward. And everybody responds differently. When you first get out, you may live in fear of being condemned for leaving. And they probably will condemn you for leaving if they're a cult. You may feel numb or depressed. May not know how you feel because they've been telling you how you feel for so long that you're not really in touch with your own emotions. You've had to pack your feelings down in order to carry on with whatever the cult wanted you to do. Opening up about the experience could bring you to tears. Once somebody that I trusted very much and looked up to ended up hurting me very deeply, and even a year later I couldn't bring it out without my throat closing and my hands shaking, my stomach knotting. It was a painful situation. And in my personal story, realizing what was going on with him, and I believe he has a personality disorder, that didn't excuse him, but it did make me feel better. I guess because then I knew why, and I knew it wasn't my fault, and that made it a lot easier to have grace for him. Not that I talk to him anymore. I absolutely do not. You may not know how to manage your freedom. This goes back to not knowing what you feel. What a lot of cults do to retain members is to keep them busy, sometimes even deprive them of sleep. Maybe your cult never gave you any free time or managed all of your free time for you. Maybe they told you when and what to eat. And now you're constantly snacking. Like when people get out of prison, they tend to gain a lot of weight because suddenly they have the freedom to go to the fridge whenever it pops into their head. They've lost that self-control and they need to regain it. You may suffer from a sudden lack of identity. You don't know who you are on your own because the cult was your entire source of identity. Certain personalities who grow up with certain parents tend to develop personality disorders that make them incredibly dependent on others. I actually knew someone who would ask me which door she was allowed to leave the building through, and I was like, leave through any door you want. But it was constant questions like that, and I should have been more patient with her because it wasn't her fault. That made her very susceptible to being in a controlling relationship, being with a man who did not treat her respectfully at all. You may not know how to say no or establish healthy boundaries, and actually a pet, like a dog or a horse or even a cat, can really help you figure that out, because animals are good at just being upfront and saying, like, you're standing too close to me, or I'm lonely, you need to spend more time with me. They tell you that with their body language, and that can help you figure out whether you're really codependent, too close to people, or whether you're distant and you're not making healthy connections. An animal's also a safe way to explore having healthy connections with someone who can't say something to hurt your feelings. Eventually you need to do that with human beings as well, but animals are a good stepping stone. Instead of being someone who's easily controlled, Getting out of an abusive relationship or an abusive organization, you may now be hypersensitive to being controlled, and you might not take direction well. So that's something to watch out for. When you leave, your abusers could respond in, they tend to respond in predictable ways. They might act sympathetic and apologetic, might even take a little responsibility for what they did to you. So you're right, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. The point is just to get you back. Once you're back under their control, the cycle repeats itself. They may also try to be like, hey, we can still be friends, right? We can still talk now and then. Even in a regular breakup, if people still want to be friends right away, they probably aren't ready to make a clean break of it. You don't make a clean break by staying friends. They may talk to you as if you and your behavior are the real problem. Certainly none of us are perfect, but we should each be responsible for our own role in a destructive relationship. And an abuser or a cult plays a much bigger role because they have all the power. They convinced you to give them all the power. You do not have to be nice. If they won't take no for an answer, you can firmly say, do not contact me again. Once they realize that they can't control you, it could get really ugly. If they haven't done this already, they may try to separate you from anyone outside of the cult, or even isolate you from most of the people inside the cult, like pick your friends for you. They want you to be lonely. They want you to be dependent because that makes you someone who's more easily taken advantage of. I know someone who spent her entire time in the Brethren, which is a very small cult, but a persistent one. She spent her whole time there just trying to get to a payphone and call her mom, but she needed permission to do that and was never given any. Finally, she got kicked out for some silly reason. She was rebellious. They actually had no idea to the extent that she was being rebellious. They kicked her out for something petty. Another response the cult or the abuser may have is telling everyone all your humiliating secrets. The fear of this happening is another thing that can keep you in that bad relationship. And if they don't have any dirt on you, they might make it up. They might go out publicly, say all these things about you, and a lot of them could believe those things because they're in a cult too. They're also victims. Not that that makes what they do to you okay. My friend Paul was in a biker ministry until it started acting like a gang, and somebody attacked someone else with a machete, so Paul reported them. And they started telling everybody he was a snitch, a drunk, a thief, a traitor. They shunned him, so that was really tough for him. Speaking of shunning, lots and lots of cults shun ex-members. They'll like tell a mother she can't talk to her child because supposedly this makes them come back. Maybe sometimes that makes people come back because they're so desperate to talk to you again, or maybe more likely I think it's what keeps people from leaving in the first place because they fear the shunning. I know someone who was raised Jehovah's Witness, and when she was shunned, they actually invited her to a funeral. She went all the way back there thinking, like, we're going to be nice for the funeral. But the whole point of inviting her was to shun her some more. It was a very hurtful thing. The ex, or the cult, may stalk you. It took me years to realize that my 3 friends were actually one friend. When I realized it, I felt like a moron. Like, of course, they all spoke the same. They all had, like, a similar style. I trusted these people at the time, I trusted this one person at the time because he was older, and I thought I could expect more from him. Apparently not. In reality, his ego was super fragile, and he was using all these fake accounts so that he could spy on me through my other online friends who were actually just him. I don't know how common this is, and it depends on the cults, but they may even threaten you physically. And there's no shame in getting a restraining order. In some situations, you might want to reach out to people in other states and just move. And that's not fair. I wouldn't want that to happen to you, but I also wouldn't want you to give any more years of your life to a cult or to a person who's draining your life away. A cult, like an abusive partner, makes you doubt your intrinsic value. Your sense of worth is tied to the cult, or tied to the pimp, or tied to the boyfriend, or tied to the wife. It's possible that you already doubted your self-worth and the cult took advantage of that, but the cult probably also contributed to your damaged self-worth and really made you feel like you're too stupid to figure out the truth, that you're completely dependent on them for special revelations. Know that there are plenty of other cults and pimps in the wings who are going to sniff out your hole, and like getting out of one could just as easily mean falling into another. So you need to be aware of what got you in that situation in the first place and what a healthy relationship looks like. What made you think you were too dumb to find truth and love on your own? What made you feel so desperate for approval that you were willing to give up your personal freedoms, your identity, your style, and let someone else micromanage your life and your mind? Those are important questions, and they're probably very painful questions to get to the bottom of. So, like you needed more pain in your life, right? It's a lot of work, but it's very important work. I would say what you really need to do right now is address your insecurities. Shelley Lubin, who's a former stripper, prostitute, porn actress, she said something like, keep putting in the truth to push out the lies. You should know that you will be tempted to make excuses for your abusers. You probably loved them, and you probably still love them and wish things could be better, which is just another temptation for going back to them. So I'm not saying you need to have a heart full of hatred, but you really need to watch, like, hey, I might love somebody, but that doesn't mean they have to be in my life. That doesn't mean I have to like them. It doesn't mean I have to reconcile to them. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. You need to surround yourself with a loving support group. I know the cult felt like a loving support group and didn't turn out to be one, so maybe that's scary. But going it alone is how you end up in another cult. Eventually, you're going to seek out some sort of human connection, and you want it to be a good one. Not real great theology in this book, but it's not a theology book, so it doesn't matter. It's called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. That book pretty much explained to me how all human beings worked. It showed me how I mistreat people. It showed me how others mistreat me. It showed me how other people that I love were mistreated by their friends and family. It's just a really essential book, especially if you don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. That book can give you a good idea. Another thing you need to do is give yourself time to heal. A lot of ex-cult members are turned off to religion in general. It's kind of like you overdosed. I heard one person say it's like overdosing. So you might really be afraid to go to church. You might be afraid of religious people in general. And that isn't an abnormal response to being hurt by a cult. So I'm not pushing you to like immediately join another church if that's difficult for you. But at the same time, you will be tempted to hole up in your pain and your brokenness and your resentment forever. You are in a position to become very prejudiced against religious people, and that's most people. And that will eat your life away. So if you feel ready, or even just half ready, to take that step and join a normal, healthy church, I encourage you to do that. That goes back to surrounding yourself with a loving support group. People need community. In the meantime, you are perfectly free to do your own research and read whatever you want, but you should also be open to what the experts say, what the scholars say. Not even necessarily religious scholars, because a lot of the stuff that's popular, a lot of the theories that are popular online are actually fringe theories, even in a secular university. Like, nobody would employ a professor who doesn't believe Jesus existed, but lots of people on the internet like to argue that Jesus didn't exist. So I'm not saying you are the final authority on what is and isn't true, but you absolutely have the right to research anything and question anything that you want to question, because the truth is not threatened by that. Somebody who I have learned a lot from, just in his approach to other human beings, is J.S. Park, who is he's a former atheist, but he's a lot of things. You can't pigeonhole people. He is a very complex person, a very, very, very compassionate person. So if you can check out J.S. Park on Tumblr or Facebook, or check out his book, What the Church Won't Talk About, I think that would be very helpful to you. You can also look up Alistair McGrath and his History of Science. He is, I think, a biophysicist, a molecular biophysicist or something, but he's also an Oxford theologian and another ex-atheist. And it might surprise you to learn that the real relationship between the church and science is much more complex than the church or than pop culture generally say that it is. Ravi Zacharias and Arzim Ministries, lots of really brilliant people who promote a reasonable faith. That's not faith that's been widowed away into only the things that we consider reasonable. That's just saying, don't check your brains at the door. Speaking of which, Josh McDowell is another great ex-atheist whose intellectual honesty is what led him to Christianity. And he fights so hard against ignorance. He always says, you don't help somebody through ignorance. You help somebody through giving them the truth and giving them access to information. He's also a sexual abuse survivor. When he was a little boy, he was sexually abused by his babysitter, which he didn't talk about until, I think, just a few years ago. But now he has a really good campaign against abuse in the church. Not that he was abused in the church, but he's helping prevent that from happening. So check out Josh McDowell as well. If you have questions about the role of women, gays, other minorities in the church, Amy Orr Ewing is very well researched. She's very kind and easy to listen to. She's another Oxford theologian, and she also works with Ravi Zacharias. William Lane Craig, really smart guy. I don't always know what he's talking about, but his ministry is called Reasonable Faith. Lee Strobel is another staple, a lot like Josh McDowell. Those two are pretty mainstream. I could really keep you busy with a list of all the thinkers who rock my world. John Lennox, when I'm feeling stressed out and sad, I just listen to John Lennox for a while, and helps me take a load off. It really does. My last thing on the to-do list is know that I freaking love you. I think it's so awesome that you decided to leave your cult behind, or leave your abuser behind, or leave your abusive ex-boyfriend or pimp behind. That's not easy. So you might not feel real strong, but as far as I'm concerned, you're a rock star. A little advice from my friend Paul, who I mentioned earlier. He writes, the biggest advice I can give is don't let your relationship with people replace or interfere with your personal relationship with Jesus. Start over from scratch by spending a couple hours each day just reading the Bible and letting it speak for itself. And don't touch commentaries until you've read the whole thing through at least once. Like someone else said, the truth will set you free. Also read a biography of William Tyndale. The someone else he was talking about is Rose, who says the root issue is earning God's favor versus receiving the pure gospel. That's what cults try to mess up. Power in the cross of Christ and his shed blood, the truth of the word sets captives free. And above all, remember the words of Jesus. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. He welcomes sincere questions, sincere seeking. And if you don't give up, you will find him. Take care.
Do you like getting homeschooled, or would you rather go to school, just a public school with some other kids? No, I like being homeschooled.
What did your mom say when you finally won?
Well, I don't know what my mom said. You better ask my mom if you want the answer to that question.
All right, let me ask your mom. You're making this tough for me today, Evan.